The archives of the Blackwood estate, discovered sealed within a forgotten rosewood box, reveal a story not of politics or war, but of a quiet winter broken by an unexpected spring. It began, as so many societal tempests do, with whispers at a ball, and with a woman who had learned to make silence her only shield. Eleanora Ainsworth existed in a state of muted elegance, a watercolor painting in a gallery of garish oils. Her engagement to Viscount Alistair Finch was less a union of hearts and more a transaction of unfortunate necessity. Her late father, a gentleman scholar with more books than coin, had entangled their modest estate with the Finch family's holdings in a desperate final act to secure her future. Now, that future felt like a beautifully crafted cage whose gilded bars were the Viscount's chilling civility and the constant assessing gaze of his mother, Lady Beatrice Finch. She was considered plain, though she was not. Her features were fine and intelligent, her eyes a deep, thoughtful gray that saw far more than they revealed. But in a world that valued dazzling plumage, her quiet grace was dismissed as drabness. She was sensible, they said, a term used by society to describe a woman who was neither wealthy enough to be indulged nor beautiful enough to be forgiven. Alistair treated her like a possession he was not yet sure he wished to display, a piece of sensible furniture acquired for its utility rather than its beauty. Tonight was the Duchess of Wellington's annual Starlight Ball, the glittering apex of the London season. Eleanora stood beside Lady Beatrice near a colonnade draped in ivy and silk roses, the scent of hothouse flowers mingling with beeswax and expensive perfume. The air was thick with the music of a string quartet and the murmur of 100 conversations, a sound that felt like the buzzing of gilded insects. Her gown, a simple silk of dove gray, was a testament to her quiet nature, chosen to blend into the opulent backdrop rather than command it. It was a winter of my own making, she often thought, this quiet life I lead. Lady Beatrice, a woman carved from ice and disapproval, fanned herself with a brisk, cutting motion. Her eyes, small and sharp, scanned the room, missing nothing, approving of little. "The Croft heiress is here," she murmured, her voice a low rustle of silk and venom. "They say her father's shipping concerns have doubled their profits this year. All that vulgar trade, but one cannot argue with the result." Eleanora said nothing. She knew what this meant. She had seen the way Alistair's gaze had followed Miss Amelia Croft for weeks, the way his pleasantries had become more frequent, more cloying. She was the gilded prize, and Eleanora was the sensible, fraying contract he was now eager to dissolve. The knowledge was a cold stone in her stomach, a familiar weight she had carried for months. Alistair appeared at his mother's elbow, his smile as polished and empty as the marble floor. He was a handsome man, in a shallow, predictable way. His features pleasing, but lacking the character carved by deep thought or genuine emotion. He gave Eleanora a cursory nod, his eyes already flicking past her towards the shimmering pink confection that was Miss Croft. "Eleanora, you are looking, well," he offered, the word hanging in the air with the faint damnation of its own inadequacy. He did not ask her to dance. He never did, not unless protocol absolutely demanded it. Dancing required a connection, a shared rhythm, and they had none. "Go, Alistair," Lady Beatrice commanded under her breath. "Do not linger. The Duke of Blackwood is here. He is watching." The name fell into the room with the weight of a dropped portcullis. Alaric, the Duke of Blackwood, the Iron Duke, a man spoken of in hushed, speculative tones, immensely powerful, staggeringly wealthy, and a recluse for the better part of a decade, ever since the tragic death of his young wife. He was a phantom who haunted the edges of society, a severe, unsmiling figure who appeared so rarely that his presence at any event was a cataclysmic social event in itself. Eleanora's eyes instinctively scanned the room's shadowed corners, the balconies overlooking the dance floor. It was said he preferred to observe from a distance, a hawk in the rafters. She saw nothing but velvet curtains and flickering candlelight. Alistair, however, needed no further encouragement. With a bow that was almost dismissive, he left them, making a direct and unerring path toward Amelia Croft. Eleanora watched him go, the cold stone in her stomach hardening into a shard of ice. She felt a tremor in her hands and clasped them together, her knuckles white. She would not give them the satisfaction of a scene. Her dignity was the only possession they could not touch. "He needs a proper wife," Lady Beatrice said, not looking at Eleanora, but at her son's retreating back. "One who can elevate the family name, not merely sustain it. Your dowry is a pittance, child, a temporary patch on a fraying coat. Alistair requires a new garment altogether." The cruelty was so casual, so utterly matter-of-fact, that it stole the air from Eleanora's lungs. It was not an attack. It was a simple statement of business. She was a poor investment, and her contract was about to be terminated. She felt a sudden, desperate need for air, for escape from the cloying perfume and the crushing weight of 1,000 judging eyes. With a quiet, "Excuse me, my lady," she turned and walked away, her movements measured and calm, a stark contrast to the frantic beating of her heart. She did not look back. She navigated the throng of dancers, her gray dress a river of quiet sorrow flowing against a tide of jubilant color. Her destination was the conservatory, a glass palace of ferns and orchids she knew would be largely deserted. As she passed behind a large marble pillar, she heard their voices again. Alistair and his mother had found a secluded alcove, believing themselves to be unheard. "She is a mouse," Alistair was saying, his voice laced with a petulant irritation she knew so well. "A gray, quiet little mouse. I need a lioness. Miss Croft has spirit, and more importantly, she has £20,000 a year. The engagement must be handled delicately," his mother cautioned, "but decisively. We cannot afford for her to become a clinging, hysterical creature. A clean break, tonight. Once she is sufficiently humbled, she will retreat to the country and trouble us no more." Humbled. The word struck her like a physical blow. They thought her quietness was weakness. They mistook her endurance for passivity. In that moment, something within her, a core of resilience forged through years of quiet observation and lonely dignity, solidified from ice into steel. She did not hide. She stepped out from behind the pillar. They both started, their faces a mask of shock, quickly replaced by irritation on Alistair's part and glacial composure on his mother's. "Eleanora," Alistair began, his tone a mixture of bluster and embarrassment, "I did not see you there." "Evidently," she replied, her voice astonishingly level. It did not tremble. It did not break. It was as clear and cold as a winter morning. She looked directly at him, her gray eyes holding his gaze without a flicker of fear or pleading. "You were discussing the termination of our engagement. Please, do not let me interrupt the finalization of your business arrangements." Alistair flushed a deep, unbecoming red. "Now see here, Eleanora, there is no need for theatrics." "Theatrics?" A small, humorless smile touched her lips. "I believe you are mistaken, my lord. I am merely acknowledging the reality of our situation. You wish to marry Miss Croft for her fortune. You find me to be a gray, quiet little mouse, and you wish for me to be humbled." She paused, letting the words settle in the suddenly silent air between them. "Consider your engagement to me, Viscount, to be at an end. I release you. Is that decisive enough for you?" She held his gaze for a moment longer, watching the surprise curdle into fury in his eyes. He had expected tears, hysterics. He had not expected this cold, regal dismissal. She had taken his power from him, refusing to play the part of the victim in his shabby little drama. Without another word, she turned her back on him and his stunned mother. She walked away, not toward the conservatory as she had planned, but toward the grand terrace doors that led out into the damp night air. Each step was a victory. Each footfall on the polished marble was a declaration of her own worth. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, whispers erupting in her wake like the crackle of a forest fire. Let them watch. She pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the chill of the London night. The cool air was a balm on her heated skin. The distant sounds of the city were a welcome reprieve from the suffocating music within. She walked to the stone balustrade, gripping the cold, damp stone as a fine mist began to fall, clinging to her hair and the silk of her dress. She did not weep. The winter inside her had finally met the winter outside, and in the stark cold, she felt a strange, thrilling sense of clarity. She was free. She did not notice the tall, dark figure that had detached himself from the deeper shadows of the terrace. He had been standing near a stone urn, a sentinel cloaked in the night, and had witnessed the entire exchange, from her quiet dignity by the pillar to her final, devastating departure. Duke Alaric of Blackwood had come to the ball out of a deep and wearying sense of duty, intending to stay only long enough to be seen. But he had found himself watching the quiet girl in the dove-gray dress. He had noticed her before, at other, smaller events, a still point in a turning world. He had seen the intelligence in her eyes, the resilience in the set of her jaw as she endured the casual cruelties of her fiancé. He had seen her strength when no one else was looking. Tonight, he had seen that strength forged into a weapon. The way she had faced them, with no armor but her own self-possession, had struck him with the force of a physical blow. It was the kind of courage he understood, the kind he valued above all else. It was the courage of a survivor. He watched her now, standing alone in the mist, a solitary figure of defiance. She shivered, a slight tremor that ran through her frame, and wrapped her arms around herself. Without a second thought, he moved. He said nothing. Words were clumsy, inadequate things. Instead, he shrugged off his own heavy wool greatcoat, the dark fabric seeming to absorb the very night around it. He stepped up behind her and, with a gentle, impersonal movement, draped it over her shoulders. Eleanor gasped, startled, spinning around to face him. Her eyes widened as she recognized the formidable, almost mythical man from the drawing room descriptions. The Duke of Blackwood. His face was all harsh angles and shadow, his eyes a startlingly pale blue, like chips of ice. He was taller than she had imagined, and his presence was an overwhelming force, a palpable gravity that seemed to bend the very air around him. "Your Grace," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. She made to shrug off the coat, an instinct of propriety warring with the profound comfort of its warmth and weight. "Keep it," he said. His voice was a low rumble, deeper than she had expected, and utterly devoid of pity. It was a simple, declarative command. "The night is cold. You are not." The last three words were not about the temperature. They were a statement of fact, an acknowledgement of the fire he had just witnessed. He looked at her, his gaze intense, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Eleanor felt truly seen. He saw not a mouse, but the quiet lioness she had just discovered within herself. He gave a single, formal nod of his head, then turned and walked back into the glittering ballroom, leaving her wrapped in the impossible warmth of his coat and the profound shock of his silent, decisive intervention. Eleanor returned to her modest rented house in a daze, the Duke's heavy coat a tangible reminder of the night's surreal events. Her loyal maid, Martha, met her at the door, her face etched with concern. The gossip had traveled faster than her carriage. "Miss Eleanora," Martha began, wringing her hands. "The things they are saying." "They are all true, Martha," Eleanora said, her voice weary but firm. She handed the coat to the bewildered maid. "The engagement is over." She felt a pang of anxiety seeing the ducal crest on the lining. "Have this cleaned and ready. It must be returned tomorrow." She expected to spend a sleepless night, her mind replaying her own humiliation. Instead, she felt a strange and hollow peace. The break, though brutal, was also a liberation. She was no longer a commodity to be traded. But as she lay in the quiet dark, the future loomed as a vast, uncertain landscape. Her small income would not sustain her in London. She would have to retreat to the country, just as Lady Beatrice had predicted, and live a life of quiet obscurity. The thought, which once would have seemed a peaceful respite, now felt like a surrender. The next morning, before she had even decided how to orchestrate the return of the Duke's coat, a liveried footman arrived at her door. He bore a small, crisp envelope sealed with a severe black wax stamp. It was the first note. Her fingers trembled slightly as she broke the seal. The paper was thick, expensive, the handwriting a strong, decisive script. It contained only 2 sentences. "You left in haste and forgot your shawl. I will see it returned to you this afternoon." She frowned. She hadn't been wearing a shawl. She had left hers in the carriage, never bringing it into the ballroom. He knew that. He must have known. This was a pretext. A silken blade cutting through the thick tapestry of social convention. He was creating a reason to communicate, an excuse to bridge the chasm between their stations. A strange flutter, a mix of apprehension and intrigue, stirred within her. True to his word, another messenger arrived that afternoon. He carried a carefully wrapped package and a second, identical envelope. Inside the package was not her simple woolen shawl, but a magnificent creation of cashmere so fine it felt like woven mist, the color of a stormy sea that perfectly matched her eyes. Tucked inside was the second note. "The gardens at Blackwood Manor have fallen into disuse since my wife's passing. They are overcome with weeds and sorrow. My housekeeper informs me you possess a deep knowledge of botany. I find myself in need of an expert's consultation. My carriage will call for you tomorrow at 10, should you be inclined to accept." It was audacious. It was unorthodox. It was a lifeline. He was not offering charity, which her pride would have forced her to refuse. He was offering a position, a purpose. He was offering her a sanctuary disguised as employment. He had seen her value, not just her character, but her intellect, her skills. The serpent of jealousy she had felt watching Alistair court Miss Croft was nothing compared to the profound, humbling gratitude that washed over her now. He was offering her a garden to tend, both literally and metaphorically. The Blackwood carriage, a somber but immaculate black lacquered coach drawn by 2 perfectly matched grays, arrived precisely at 10. Stepping inside felt like entering another world. The interior was lined with dark blue velvet, the air cool and quiet. The journey to Blackwood Manor took them out of the city's grimy clutches and into the green, rolling countryside. The estate was vast, a kingdom unto itself. The manor house, a formidable edifice of gray stone and mullioned windows that seemed to have grown from the very earth. It was beautiful, but melancholy, a sleeping giant dreaming of a forgotten summer. The Duke himself met her not in a grand receiving hall, but at a small side entrance that led directly into the gardens. He was dressed not in formal ducal attire, but in simple, well-tailored country clothes. He looked less like a phantom of the London ballrooms and more like a man at peace in his own domain, albeit a domain steeped in sadness. "Miss Ainsworth," he greeted her with a slight bow. "Thank you for coming." "Your Grace," she replied, curtsying. "The gardens are extensive." She looked out over a landscape that must have once been a masterpiece. Now, magnificent stone terraces were choked with ivy, Rose trellises stood bare and skeletal, and a beautiful reflecting pool was murky with algae. It was a perfect physical manifestation of the grief that had shuttered his life. It was a winter garden. "They were my wife's creation," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. "Isabel. She loved them. After she died, I could not bear to look at them, so I let them go." They walked in silence for a time, Eleonora assessing the damage, her mind already working, cataloging the overgrown perennials, the blighted boxwoods, the dormant potential. He watched her, his expression unreadable. He did not fill the silence with idle chatter. He seemed to understand her need to think, to observe. It was a comfortable quiet, a shared space rather than an empty one. He led her to a small, secluded pavilion where a table had been set with tea and cakes. "Tell me what you see," he commanded gently as they sat. And so she did. She spoke of root division and hard pruning, of soil enrichment and companion planting. She spoke of bringing back the climbing roses on the south-facing wall and clearing the water lilies in the pond. Her voice, usually so hesitant in social settings, became clear and confident. She was in her element, speaking a language she loved. He listened, his intense gaze never leaving her face, and she realized he was not just listening to her words, but to the passion and intelligence behind them. After an hour, he stood. "You will need resources. The head gardener and his staff are at your disposal. Order what you need. I will see to the accounts." He then led her inside, not through the grand staterooms, but into his library. It was a cathedral of books, 2 stories high, with a rolling ladder and the scent of old leather and paper. It was the most beautiful room she had ever seen. "This may also be of use to you," he said, gesturing to the towering shelves. "There are several first editions on landscape design and botany." On a large mahogany desk near the fireplace, a single leather-bound volume of poetry lay open. As she drew closer, she saw a small, folded note resting upon a sonnet by Shakespeare. The third note. Her heart gave a little skip. She waited until he was distracted, pulling a heavy botanical atlas from a shelf, before she discreetly picked it up and slipped it into her reticule. She read it in the carriage on the way home, her hands trembling. It was shorter than the others, and infinitely more personal. "Your presence brings a quiet I had forgotten was possible." The words were a key, turning a lock in a door she had not even realized was closed. He was not just offering her a garden to heal. He was admitting that she was healing him. The winter of his own making was beginning to thaw. The following weeks fell into a rhythm. Each morning, the Blackwood carriage would collect her. She would spend her days in the gardens, directing the small team of gardeners, her hands gloved and often smudged with dirt. She worked with a focused intensity, pouring all her frustrated energy and intelligence into the soil. Slowly, miraculously, the garden began to breathe again. Weeds were cleared, beds were turned, and the first green shoots of new life began to emerge. The Duke was a constant, quiet presence. He would often appear in the late afternoon, not to inspect her work, but simply to walk with her through the reviving pathways. He rarely spoke of his late wife again, but Eleonora felt her presence in the ghost scent of the old roses and the design of the parterres. She felt she was not replacing a memory, but honoring it, coaxing it back to life. During one of these walks, as a cool autumn wind rustled the dying leaves, he finally spoke of the past. "It happened here," he said, his voice low, stopping near an ancient oak tree at the edge of the woods. Isabel was an expert horsewoman, fearless. Her horse was spooked by a snake on the path, a freak accident. He looked at the tree, not at Eleonora. "I found her. For years, I blamed myself. I had given her the horse. I had encouraged her to ride that day. The guilt, it became a fortress. I locked the gates and dismissed the world. He turned to her then, and the ice in his eyes seemed to have melted, replaced by a profound, aching vulnerability. I saw you that night at the ball. I saw them try to break you, and I saw that you would not break. You have a different kind of courage than she did. Hers was loud, brilliant, a summer storm. Yours is quiet, enduring, like the roots of this old tree. It runs deeper than anyone knows. He took a small step closer. I told myself I was merely being charitable. A duke's noblesse oblige. It was a lie. I was selfish. I wanted to see that strength up close. I wanted to see if it could teach me how to live again. The confession hung between them, raw and astonishing. He, the Iron Duke, was admitting his own weakness, his own cowardice. He had hidden from life, and she, in her quiet defiance, had shown him the way back. She reached out, a gesture she would never have dared to make weeks ago, and placed her hand on his arm. The fabric of his coat was coarse beneath her fingers. "Grief is not a fortress, Your Grace," she said softly. "It is a winter garden. It may seem dead, but there is still life beneath the frost, waiting for the sun." He looked down at her hand on his arm, then back to her face, his expression one of dawning wonder. The next day, a fourth note was waiting for her, left on the sundial in the newly cleared rose garden. "You have broken the frost. Do not retreat." But the world outside their fragile sanctuary had not been idle. Viscount Alistair Finch's fortunes had taken a dramatic turn for the worse. His courtship of Amelia Croft had stalled. Her father, a shrewd man of business, had made inquiries and found the Finch finances to be a house of cards. Creditors that had once been patient suddenly became ravenous, calling in notes and demanding settlement. Alistair, panicked and increasingly desperate, heard the whispers connecting Eleanora's name with the Duke of Blackwood. His vanity, coupled with his financial terror, curdled into a possessive fury. She was his, a possession he had discarded, but one he would not suffer another man, especially a man of such power, to claim. He ambushed her one afternoon as her carriage was returning to London. His own carriage blocked the narrow country lane, and he appeared at her window, his face flushed, his eyes wild. "Eleanora, what is the meaning of this? Gallivanting about the country with that man? Our engagement is a binding contract. You will come with me now. We will be married by special license before the week is out." He reached for the door handle, his intentions clear. Before her own fear could take root, a second carriage, the formidable black coach of the Duke, thundered up behind them. Alaric himself swung down from the driver's box, his face a mask of cold, controlled rage. He moved with the deadly grace of a predator. "Viscount," the Duke's voice was a blade of ice, "you will remove your hand from my property." He was not referring to the carriage. Alistair recoiled as if struck. "Blackwood, this is a private matter between my fiancé and me." "She is not your fiancé," Alaric stated, walking until he stood directly in front of the smaller man. He was a full head taller, a monolith of power and menace. "And your financial troubles, which I imagine are the true source of this pathetic desperation, are no longer private either." He reached into his greatcoat, but instead of a weapon, he pulled out a sheaf of papers. "Your gambling debts from the Whites Club? I own them. The mortgage on your crumbling ancestral home? I hold it. Every promissory note, every gentleman's agreement, every shilling you owe in this world, Viscount, is now owed directly to me." Alistair stared at the papers, his face draining of all color. He was ruined, utterly and completely. His entire world had been bought out from under him by the silent, watchful man he had never even considered a rival. The Duke did not spare him another glance. He turned to the carriage window, his expression softening as his eyes met Eleanora's. The cold fury was gone, replaced by a raw, open emotion that made her heart ache. "He will not trouble you again," he said, his voice now a low, intimate rumble meant only for her. He opened the carriage door. "Eleanora Ainsworth, you came into my life and brought purpose to my days and peace to my nights. You have replanted my soul. I am asking you not to be my ward or my consultant, but my wife." He went down on one knee, there on the muddy country lane, the most powerful man in England kneeling before her. "Marry me, Eleanora, not for my protection, but as my partner, as my duchess, as the woman who single-handedly brought spring back to my world." He opened his hand. There was no box, just a ring, a magnificent sapphire the color of a twilight sky, surrounded by diamonds that glittered like the first stars. It was a ring fit for a queen. Tears, which she had refused to shed for her own humiliation, now streamed freely down her face for the sheer, overwhelming beauty of his love. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Alaric." Later that evening, a final package was delivered to her house. Inside the velvet box, the sapphire ring rested on a bed of satin. Beneath it was a small, folded card. The fifth and final note. "My heart, my name, my fortune. They have been yours since the moment you walked away from him with your head held high. This is merely the formal declaration of a truth my soul has known for months." The Duke's public reckoning was as swift and devastating as his private machinations. He announced a grand ball at Blackwood Manor to formally celebrate their engagement. All of society was invited, a summons that could not be ignored. Alistair and Lady Beatrice, clinging to the last shreds of their reputation and unaware of the full extent of their ruin, attended. They saw it as their last chance to salvage their position, perhaps to publicly shame Eleanora or appeal to the Duke's sense of propriety. Eleanora stood at the top of the grand staircase, her hand resting on Alaric's arm. She was no longer the girl in dove gray. She wore a gown of deep sapphire velvet that matched her ring, her hair styled in an elegant chignon, her bearing regal and assured. She was the Duchess in waiting, and she looked it. As they descended the stairs, a hush fell over the ballroom. She was not a mouse. She was a lioness, and this was her domain. They made their way through the stunned assembly, accepting congratulations, Alaric's hand a warm, steady presence at the small of her back. They found the Finches near the champagne fountain, their faces pale masks of disbelief and fury. "Your Grace," Lady Beatrice began, her voice tight with suppressed rage. "Surely you cannot be serious. This person was engaged to my son. There are contracts, proprieties." "Were engaged," Alaric corrected her calmly, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "A contract which the Viscount himself saw fit to publicly dissolve. As for other contracts—" He paused, and a lawyerly-looking man stepped forward, presenting him with a single, damning document. "I believe this one is more pertinent. It is the deed to Finch House and all its holdings, which, due to foreclosure on debts I now own, is my property. You have 1 week to vacate the premises." A collective gasp swept through the room. It was a public execution, delivered with the cold precision of a surgeon. Alistair, goaded beyond reason, lunged forward. "You stole her from me!" Alaric didn't even flinch. He simply stepped in front of Eleanora. "One cannot steal what was so carelessly discarded, Viscount. You threw away a diamond because you were too ignorant to see its worth. Your loss, my eternal gain." Lady Beatrice, her face a thunderous ruin, turned her venom on Eleanora. "You are a shameless social climber, a conniving little upstart." This was her moment. Eleanora stepped out from behind Alaric's protective form. She was calm, her voice clear and carrying, devoid of malice, but honed to a fine, sharp point. "Some people build their lives on foundations of character, Lady Beatrice," she said, her gaze unwavering. "Others on foundations of sand. I trust you will find your new, more modest accommodations stable enough." A ripple of shocked laughter and impressed murmurs went through the crowd. The Finches were finished. Destroyed not by a torrent of rage, but by a quiet, devastating truth. They turned and fled the ballroom, their social ghosts already fading before they reached the door. Later that night, after the last guest had departed, Alaric led Eleonora to the center of the empty, candlelit ballroom. The music was gone, but a new melody seemed to hum in the air between them. "My Duchess," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. He framed her face with his hands, his pale eyes burning with a love that was as fierce as it was tender. "You have silenced all the ghosts." "No," she whispered, raising a hand to his cheek. "We have given them peace." He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of gratitude or protection. It was a kiss of profound, earth-shattering passion, a meeting of two souls who had found in each other's quiet strength a home they had never known. It was the sealing of their bond, the true beginning. They were married a week later in the revived gardens of Blackwood Manor, under the ancient oak tree where he had first confessed his pain. It was a small, private ceremony. Her only attendant was Martha, who was now the head of Eleonora's personal staff. An epilogue, written in the margins of the ducal archives a year later, tells the rest. The Duchess of Blackwood was a resounding success. She managed the vast estates with an intelligence and competence that earned the respect of everyone, restoring the gardens to a glory that surpassed even their original beauty. The Duke, once a figure of severe myth, was now simply Alaric, a man softened by happiness, whose rare smiles were reserved exclusively for his wife. News occasionally filtered back from the continent of a disgraced viscount and his bitter mother, living in squalor in a cheap boarding house in Brussels, a cautionary tale whispered in London drawing rooms. One perfect summer afternoon, Alaric found Eleonora in the heart of the rose garden, her hands bare as she pruned a climbing rose, its vibrant pink blossoms a testament to her care. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "The gardens are beautiful this year," he said, his voice a contented murmur against her hair. She leaned back against him, her heart full. "That is because they are loved," she replied. They stood there for a long time, in the warm sun, surrounded by the life they had built together. The winter was a distant memory. Spring had finally, irrevocably, arrived. They had arrived here like a ring set down, a complete and perfect circle of their own making.